This is Mark chapter 9, 14 through 29. And when he came to his disciples, he saw a great multitude about them, and the scribes questioning with them. And straightway all the people, when they beheld him, were greatly amazed, and running to him, saluted him. And he asked the scribes, What question ye with them? And one of the multitude answered and said, Master, I have brought unto thee my son, which hath a dumb spirit. And whithersoever he taketh him, he teareth him, and he foameth, and gnasheth with his teeth, and pineth away. And I spake to thy disciples that they should cast him out, and they could not. And he answereth him, and saith, O faithless generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him unto me. And they brought him unto him, and what he saw him, straightway the spirit tear him, and he fell on the ground and wallowed, foaming. And he asked his father, How long is it ago since he came unto him? And he said, Of a child. And ofttimes it hath cast him into the fire and into the waters to destroy him. But if thou canst do anything, have compassion on us and help us. And Jesus said unto him, If thou canst believe, all things are possible to him that believeth. Straightway the father of the child cried out and said with tears, Lord, I believe. Help thou mine unbelief. And when Jesus saw that the people came running together, he rebuked the foul spirit, saying unto him, Thou dumb and deaf spirit, I charge thee, come out of him and enter no more into him. And the spirit cried and rent him sore and came out of him. And when he is one dead, insomuch that many said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted it up, and he arose. And when he was come into the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could not we cast him out? And he said unto them, This kind can come forth by nothing but by prayer and fasting. This is the word of the Lord.
If you're trying to tell me something, you got to say it. I can't see you. Huh? That okay? All right. Thank you, Linda. We had another lector was scheduled for today, and they took ill. And I posted in the morning when they texted me and asked if someone could take it, and I barely hit the enter key, and Linda had already responded. I was like, whoa, easy there. No. I'm joking. No, I really appreciate it. It was excellent reading in such short notice. Very good. Thank you. So a young child is lying on the ground. He's foaming at the mouth. He's convulsing. The child's father is crying and pleading for his son's life. The crowd is pressing in, hungry for another miracle. The disciples are embarrassed, self-questioning, uncertain. The scribes are enjoying having the upper hand in the disciples' failure. The demon is ripping and tearing and shrieking. And who can read this account? Which parent can read this account and not feel heartbroken for everything that's going on? It's quite the commotion. And then, on top of all that, Jesus is annoyed and exasperated. So before we get into all that, let's just recap a little bit. And if some of you, I could just tell you have those reflexes, those streaming reflexes. You were about to try to do the skip recap button. There is no skip recap here. You just have to go through it with me. But we are going to recap a little bit of where we are, and then we'll get back to this crazy spectacle that is going on at the base of this mountain where Jesus has just come down from being transfigured with Moses and Elijah. So he was up on the mountain. Mike spoke about this last week. He's up on the mountain. He's transfigured in brilliant light. Moses and Elijah are there. John and Peter and James get to see this. And now they've just come down from the mountain. And as they come down, that what Linda just read is what they see. And you can't read that without, it's very difficult to read that and not come to the conclusion that Mark was deliberately invoking a couple of different Old Testament stories. Obviously, Moses coming down from Sinai, there's no doubt, I think, of that, but probably even invoking a little bit of Elijah on Mount Carmel with the prophets. So this is the scene that he's painting, and it's very reminiscent, especially of Moses when he received the 10 Commandments, and he comes down, and maybe you haven't really read it in the Bible, but maybe you've seen the movie, but they're very similar. So Moses comes down from the mountain, he's got the 10 Commandments, and when he comes down, he finds a whole spectacle going on, just a terrible amount of perversity going on, and the people are dancing and engaging in all sorts of immorality there at the base of the mountain. And Moses is shining still. His face is still shining from being in the presence of God. I mean, it's very, very reminiscent, and I think it's purposeful that he has portrayed all of this the way he has to invoke our memory to that. And that's because in a sense, the transfiguration is like, it's not really a reenactment. It's more like a reboot, right? Now that we're talking about films and movies, well, think about it kind of like Spider-Man Homecoming, and you have this rebooting, and that's why God brought back the old characters, Moses and Elijah. And there they are, right? He brings them all in together, and he's rebooting everything he did in that first covenant, and he's creating a whole new covenant there in this Mount of Transfiguration. That's what's happening up there on the mountain. And Jesus comes down from there, much like Moses did. In fact, Mark implies that just as Moses came down and was shining from being with God, apparently there was something about Jesus' appearance that was stunning, different. Because when he comes down, it says that when the people turned and saw him, they were very amazed. Now, the word that is translated, that we translate like that, Mark is the only one who uses it, and he only uses it 3 times. He uses it here. He uses it when the women see the angel at the tomb, right? And he uses it when Jesus is praying in Gethsemane, and he says he was sore amazed. And so he uses the same word. It's the same expression. 3 is the only time in the New Testament that word is used those 3 times. And that's what people thought when they saw Jesus coming down from the mount. It seems that Mark is trying to imply that there was something physically different still about Jesus, and it would fit with what we find of Moses, both in the Old and the New Testament, as it relates to having been in that type of what is often called Shekinah glory. In other words, the actual glory of God, to be in that presence. Moses, when he would leave, it said his face would still shine, and he would come down and he would talk to the people, and they would see evidence that he was getting this from God because his face was like brilliant, was like shining. And then Moses, after talking to the people, would cover his face up with a veil, right? And even though it never spells out why, it seems both through the Old and the New Testament that the reason for that was because that glory on Moses' face would start to fade away. And Moses didn't want them to see how temporal that glory of the first covenant was. That's essentially how Paul explains it in 1 Corinthians. In 1 Corinthians chapter 3, Paul goes through all that. He uses it as an illustration, and essentially what he implies is that Moses did not want them to see the temporalness, the inferiorness of that glory, which represented the glory of the first covenant. It appears then that Mark is conjuring that same image. And so what we find here in the Mount of Transfiguration is that Jesus is the fulfillment and the replacement of that prototypical glory that Moses had and Moses saw, experienced, or witnessed on Mount Sinai. And that's what Mark is building in to this whole account of the Transfiguration. Only the difference is that Jesus isn't just like a reenactment, like I said, of it. He is an entirely new version of this. Moses shined because he was with God. Jesus shined because he was God. Very important distinction. Nobody makes that distinction better than the Gospel of John. Now, the Gospel of John, like Mike explained or taught last week, it's not in the Gospel of John. But there are many commentators who have written that the Gospel of John could be considered the entirety of the Gospel an account of the Transfiguration. Meaning that the Gospel of John is looking at Jesus from the lens of the Transfiguration, of him in that glory. In fact, without a doubt, at least in my opinion, without a doubt, the prologue of the Gospel of John is obviously referencing the Transfiguration. I'll just read it to you very quickly. I'm going to read you the salient verses. It says, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. The same was in the beginning with God. And the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us. And we beheld his glory." Pay attention here. And we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth, which is the operable phrase right there, right? For those that are following, that was verse 14. I saw they were putting it up there, so I'm kind of skipping through the chapter because there's a lot of parenthetical material. But this is what John says. We saw his glory like the only begotten of the Father. And why? It's because he himself was full of grace and truth. This is where that glory comes from. And if you were to go, and we do not have time, I wish we did, but if you go to Ephesians and you compare some of this language with how Paul talks about the glory of God, because Ephesians deals a great deal with the glory of God and what relationship we have to that. And if you go and look at Ephesians, you'll find that all of this is all tied together very, very intricately or very intimately tied together, grace and truth with glory. And this is what John is explaining. We saw his glory. It was the glory of one who not only was with God, like Moses was, but was God. See, all of this is tied together by John. The glory that Jesus shined with was not just the glory of someone who had been close to God, who had seen God, who had spoken to God. That was Moses' glory. Now, if you go back in 1 Corinthians 3, which again, we do not have time to read through, but if you go read 1 Corinthians 3, you'll see Paul go through this in great detail. He explains this, that Moses had a glory, but it was a temporal glory, a fading glory. And that's why, like I said, he covered his face with a veil, with a mask, basically, because he didn't want them to see that it lasted such a short time. But Jesus, not so. So John is there explaining this transfiguration of Jesus emanating, shining out of him, the very glory of his own being. In fact, in Hebrews, it even alludes to this same language. In Hebrews 10, we'll jump right into the middle of the sentence for sake of time. It says, "By a new and living way, which Jesus had consecrated for us through the veil, that is to say, his flesh." And so we have all of this imagery throughout the New Testament dealing with really the transfiguration. And then, of course, you have that moment everyone knows about, if you know the transfiguration, where Peter blurts out because he doesn't know what else to say. He's at loss for words. And you either, like Mike says, if you're at loss for words, you either say nothing or you say something inappropriate. I'm the kind of person that says nothing, obviously. Mike confessed to being the other one. No, Peter blurts out inappropriately, "Oh, let's make 3 tabernacles. Let's make 3 little temples, little tents," right? Because what's he do? He's reverting to his cultural mindset. If you're a Jew, if you're a Second Temple Jew, if you've been raised on the Torah, if you've been raised on the stories of the Old Testament, and you see Shekinah glory, the first thing that comes into your mind is, let's build a tabernacle. Because that's what it's for. That's what a temple is. A temple is a place that contains the glory of God. It's where you bottle it. It's where you can go and visit it. It's where you can go and have a part. It's where you can connect to heaven. And every time the temples were built, when they built that tabernacle out of animal skins, when Solomon built his temple, the glory of God filled it. You can go back and read it. And it was evidence. God was saying, I will visit you in this place. Well, Peter's up on now. Remember, the temple of Solomon had been destroyed by Babylon and all that. And then they'd slowly rebuilt it. And then Herod had massively rebuilt the temple, made it this glorious building, this incredible, one of the wonders of the world. But it had never, the temple in Jesus' day had never been filled with the glory of God. God had never visited them in the temple. And now here it is. On the mountain, not that mountain where the temple is, but on a mountain, here is the glory that all Jews have been waiting for since the Babylonian captivity. They were no longer going to be Ichabod. And so he says, let's build a temple. And of course, God rebukes him. And there's a lot of reasons why. I mean, speaking out of turn comes to mind. Like, you got to know when to be quiet. You got to know when your opinion doesn't matter. Just be quiet. You'd be surprised what you would learn. I've always been told in my life. I don't believe it, but you'll be surprised what you could learn if you just be quiet. So speaking out of turn, putting Moses and Elijah. Let's build 3 tabernacles. One for Moses, one for Elijah. Oh, yeah, and one for you, Jesus. Well, he didn't say it quite like that. But no. I think the main reason is because he did not understand what he was witnessing. He didn't understand what he was witnessing. In fact, they didn't understand it. It took a long time before the disciples, the apostles, really understood what that event meant. What does that mean? What does it mean for Jesus to be transfigured like that? Well, it means a lot of things. Mike dealt with a lot of those last week. If you weren't here, go back and listen to the recording. It means, amongst other things, that there's no longer any need for a temple. Jesus was making good on his conversation to the Samaritan woman. He promised her, it is no longer going to be a matter of what mountain you worship on. What he's saying is, it won't be the Jewish temple, it won't be the Samaritan temple, it won't be the Mayan temple, it won't be the American temple. It is not going to be about mountains and temples. The glory of God is going to be visited on people through an entirely different means. What did Peter think? He thought, we need a temple to put the glory in. And God is saying, no. The glory is in no temple, which is what Paul echoes in Acts 17 as he speaks on Mars Hill, that God does not dwell in temples made of hands. Everything changed. That's why I said it got rebooted. This was a new covenant, and it was not a covenant that was headquartered inside any church or inside any tabernacle. It was in Jesus himself. The glory that they were seeing was not something that was coming on Jesus. It was something that was coming out of him. In a sense, the veil, which Hebrews says is his flesh, the mask, the outward container of his body, in a sense had been pulled away or broken open there on that mountain. And who he was, according to John, from before the beginning of creation, they were seeing that glory. So no more mountains, no more temples. So I think all of this is implied by Mark as he comes down. Apparently, there is still some remnant, some vestige of that on him somehow. It doesn't say exactly how, but we do see the reaction of the people when Jesus is coming down the mountain and we're looking at this scene, this spectacle that's happening at the base of it. What we see is the reaction of everybody when they see Jesus, and they are sore amazed. They are greatly amazed by seeing Jesus Christ, and they had just seen him go up. So something was still a little different. Whereas Moses coming down from Sinai ended in death and destruction, Jesus came down and showed that while there were similarities between Sinai and the Transfiguration, the differences were far more important than the similarities. Because Jesus came down also put out and exasperated with the people he found, but his response was very, very different than that of Moses. When Moses came down from Sinai, a lot of people died. But that's the law. When Jesus comes down, he's likewise offended at them, but his response is very, very different. So the Transfiguration truly was a foretaste of everything that was to come. In a sense, it was like time travel. The future had been brought into their present. They got to see a glimpse of what the future would be. So let's get into our narrative today. Throughout the book of Mark, up until this point, Jesus has been making his points largely with miracles, like object lessons. He's been trying to teach them things. He's been trying to get through to them. We've talked about a number of the things he's trying to teach, a number of the narratives or the little threads that run through Mark that are very important. And he's been trying to teach them these things with the miracles that he's been doing, like object lessons. Because that's how you teach people. That's how you teach little children. You don't teach little children with abstract lessons. That's what you get as you get older. Right? But when you're in first grade, kindergarten and first grade, well, they're going to get out the little coloring sheets and they're going to have little blocks and they're going to sit there and say, look, this is what 3 is. And they'll put 3 little blocks on the table, 1, 2, 3, right? That's how you learn. You learn through object lessons. This is what Jesus has been doing all the way up to chapter 8. And then in chapter 9, he has this transfiguration. And it's meant to radically transform not just history, but Jesus' own ministry and how he's going to present himself to people and how he's going to relate to them. Fundamentally change how he's going to relate to people. And now he's come down from that and he's ready to really do some serious teaching. He wants to now get them into the deep end of the pool. He wants to get you and I into the deep end of the pool. But when he gets down, he's immediately confronted with people wanting another miracle. And he's annoyed because he's past that. As far as Jesus is concerned, the glory of God has already consummated all evidence necessary. It's it. That's done. That's there. Now let's move past all of this. And instead of finding them ready and hungry to hear this deep teaching that he can now bring them, they're still begging for miracles. They're like the Israelites still clinging to Egypt. So yeah, he's annoyed. He's exasperated with them. And out of annoyance and exasperation, essentially, he performs his last miracle in the book of Mark. Well, actually, there's one more after this one. But that's a story for another day. So let's just call it his last one for now. It's interesting when Jesus is performing miracles. To me, it's interesting as I read it through Mark because he just seems so detached. It's not the Jesus you might picture in your mind. Like he just was, so concerned with everyone being ill or sick that he just couldn't help himself but to heal them. I'm sure there's an element of that. But in Mark, he doesn't often come across that way. He often comes across almost like, I don't know if you ever used to, a lot of you here are old, so you've seen it. MASH, right? The show MASH. And how the doctors would be like joking around while they got like blood splurting. And I don't know if they actually showed blood back then, but that was implied, right? That they're in there and they're like cutting people and sawing limbs and they're making jokes. And you wonder, well, why is that? Well, they're not actually finding the situation funny, but they've been there and done that so much. All right, it's kind of how it's almost like you see Jesus here throughout the book of Mark. Let me give you a few examples, because I just think it's very interesting, his attitude or his detachment, his coolness in all of this. Like, for instance, when he gets into a politically incorrect discussion with the Syrophoenician woman about the proper way to triage the patients. It's like, here she is, she's got this problem, my daughter, please. And she's like, well, that's not really how we would triage Jews and Gentiles. Just seems a little detached. Or practicing what we could call nowadays incremental interventionism with the blind man. Like, well, let's not go all out, just a little bit. How's that? I always get a kick when I go to I have real bad vision, always have. It was like when I was 13 that I realized I couldn't see anything. I'd never been able to see anything. So I got glasses for the first time, and it was like, are those trees? I have real bad vision. And I always find it interesting because I self-prescribe. I probably shouldn't say this online or live because I'll have the FBI raiding me. But I self-prescribe my own contacts, and people are always like, oh, that's horrible. But it's like when you go to the eye doctor, you do that too. They don't know what you need. They have these enormous set of lenses, and they go, do you like this one or do you like this one? This one or this one? And you tell him, why go? I just buy a bunch of different contacts, try them on, and go, do I like this one or do I like this one? What's the difference? There's no difference. Costs a lot less money. That's kind of what he's doing to the blind. I know, I jest, but he's like, how's this? No, try the other one. Yep, that's the one. That's the ticket right there. And then here he is in this story. Here's the man saying, heal my son. And the son's like laying on the ground. He's foaming at the mouth. He's writhing in pain. He's shrieking. And Jesus saying, how long has he been like that? He's getting a medical history. And there they are discussing. Here's this kid flopping around. Jesus was a lot less full of panic and desperation than we often are. But something's changed since the transfiguration besides exasperation. It's not just that Jesus says, I wanted to get on to other things, and you guys aren't letting me, and here you are bringing this stuff again. Here you are with this. Why can't you look past the physical and start appreciating the spiritual? It's more than just that. Something's changed. And even in the miracles, Jesus now requires faith. He now requires faith. Now, part of this is a response to a manipulative tactic that this man is taking. It's very hard to look at this man and see his son and not think of him just as a victim, but you do have to look at the story and realize that he is being very manipulative. Now, any of us could probably understand that if we were in his place, but we do have to acknowledge how manipulative this man is being. He comes to Jesus and he says, if you can do anything. Now, he doesn't mean if you can do anything like if you can do everything. He means if you have any power at all, if it's not a complete sham what they say about you, then do something for us. He's trying to put Jesus back on his heels. He's conning him. Now, I'm not saying that his problem wasn't real, but that is a very different attitude than the one you find at the beginning of Mark, when the leper comes to Jesus, has a very similar request, but a very different tone. The leper says to Jesus, he says, if you will, you can make me clean. Very different approach than this man saying, if you have any power at all. They say you have power, and well, let's see. Now, Jesus, in response to that, well, basically throws a hard inside fastball, right to the inside of the plate. He just throws it right back at him. In fact, it's essentially a play on words. The man says, if you can do anything, and Jesus turns right around and says, if you can just believe. He says, if you have any power, and Jesus says, if you have any faith. That's essentially what happens right there. The man says, if you have any power, and Jesus says, if you have any faith. Now, the man should have done what the leper did and just throw himself on Jesus' love and compassion instead of trying to psychologically pressure him to vindicate himself, to prove himself. And that's the point. Jesus was done proving himself. The transfiguration was the culmination of Jesus proving himself. As far as Jesus is concerned, there's nothing left to prove. God himself has spoken from heaven and said, "This is my beloved Son in whom I am well pleased." That was the end of that. So for Jesus, the time for signs, that's over. That's over. That's why he's already said, predicting this moment, no sign will be given to this generation. After he had done hundreds and hundreds of signs, because there was a certain disingenuousness about the request. The Pharisee says, "Show us a sign and we'll believe," after he had done thousands of signs. There comes a point where people are not going to believe. It doesn't matter what they see. It doesn't matter what argument can be made. They just won't believe. So as far as Jesus is concerned, he doesn't have any need to prove himself. God has already filled his ministry with his glory. Now, any miracles that are going to be done are going to be based solely on the faith of the supplicants. But let's think about this a little bit deeper of what Jesus is saying when he says, if you can believe, if you have any faith at all. The man says, if you have any power at all, and Jesus' riposte was, if you have any faith at all. Let's think about that, try to think about that a little bit deeper. We have to realize that believe cannot be without an object. In grammar, if we were talking about language, in grammar, this concept would be called an intransitive verb. Those of you that are paid attention in grammar school will know exactly what I'm talking about. Those of you like me will have to go look it up, or I'll explain it to you. So an intransitive verb is a verb that requires an object. It's real simple. So think about a sentence like, can you bring? So the verb is bring. And if I say, can you bring? Your question would be, what? Because that isn't actually a sentence, right? Bring needs something, an object to which it refers. That's an intransitive verb. We have other verbs that are transitive verbs that aren't like that, and they stand alone, right? So whether or not the word believe is this way or not, biblically speaking, it's the same principle. We often think of faith as something that just lives out there on its own, like it floats around independently of object or subject, and that's not how it works. Somebody has to believe, and they have to believe in something. So people that say, I have faith, and then you say, in whom? And they're like, well, no, I just have lots of faith. That's like saying, I bring. What do you bring? No. That's, don't be narrow. I just bring. I'm the bringer. Well, oftentimes when people talk about I believe, they're like, I'm the believer. I believe. I don't know what I believe in. I don't know who I believe in. I don't know why I believe, but I'm definitely a very spiritual believer. When Jesus is telling him, you have to believe, it's implied who the object is. Right? You have to believe in him. This is like people who say, I'm very grateful. I always find it interesting when well-known atheists will like go on Twitter and post how grateful they are. Because I'm curious. Because grateful is an intransitive concept. You have to be grateful to something, to someone, some conscious, right, mind. But they're not. They're just like, we're just grateful. We just have lots of gratitude. That's like saying, I'm sorry. For what and to whom? Well, to nobody. Well, that's not an apology. That's not gratefulness. The only way you can be grateful is if you're grateful to someone. You have to give thanks to something. You can't just be grateful for something. It has to be to something. You can't just believe in something. It has to be someone. Otherwise, you're believing in inanimate objects. How is that any different than outright paganism? You say, well, I believe in science. Well, how is that different than believing in a rock? You say, well, science is, you can put your hands on it. Right. Like a rock. You have to believe in someone. It has to be a mind. It has to be a will that you are putting your confidence in. You can't put your confidence in inanimate objects. You can't put your confidence in transient things and things that are temporal and things that are that you have control over. I believe in the things I can control. You understand the silliness of this? I put the confidence of things I don't understand and all the things I can control. You understand how silly and cyclical that is? How redundant that is? How you're just basically chewing your own tail? So when Jesus says, if you can believe, it's implied what he's talking about. He's saying, if you can believe in me, if you can believe in me, without him as the object in whom we believe, we're uttering incomplete sentences. We're living incomplete lives. Hebrews puts it this way: without faith it is impossible to please God. For he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is the rewarder of them that diligently seek him. Faith must have that object. So what is Mark trying to get at? Look, I always feel like every single time I preach on Mark in this series, I should always offer all of you a heartfelt apology, because I know there's so many things that you wish were being said that I'm not saying, that neither one of us is saying, because, I really could prepare 3, 4, 5, maybe even more sermons just on this text, because it's so dense, deals with so many subjects. So I know we're skipping a lot of things. But what my purpose is to try to help you understand what overall Mark is trying to accomplish in this writing. What the overarching narrative or framework is. So as you read Mark, you kind of got an idea of why he wrote it the way he did, why he put together the stories the way he put together, why did he mention the details he mentioned, so that then you can go back and look at all the things we're obviously skipping, and we're skipping a lot. Don't think we don't know that. We're very aware of that. In fact, that's what makes a lot of these messages I preach not great, because I'm trying to many times pack too much in and I end up missing too much at the same time. But what is Mark driving at? The transfiguration, descending from the mount, coming down into this spectacle, this incredible circus going on, and he steps into that, and he's trying to put things in order. What is Mark driving at in all of this? And I think that the number one thing we should get out of this, the takeaway for you today, is that Jesus is shifting gears in his ministry. He has been doing signs and miracles. He's been doing a lot of teaching, but signs and miracles for 8 chapters. And he comes down from that mountain of transfiguration with the idea that he's doing those no more. And he's immediately put into a situation where he essentially has to. It says he looks over, he sees all the people coming, and so he's like, he doesn't want this to become more than it is, and so he just heals the kid so he can move on. And it's the last miracle he performs, except for the last one that we'll see later. There's one more. But there's always got to be one more. And from there on, his ministry is just teaching. From there on. So this is what Mark is saying. And why such a dramatic change? Because you would ask yourself that. Imagine if the transfiguration wasn't there and you're reading Mark and you start paying attention. Wow, look, it's like every other verse, miracle, miracle, and all of a sudden, no more miracles. And all of a sudden, not only no more miracles, but when they ask, he's annoyed about it. Like, how dare you think I would do a miracle? It's like, you've been doing miracles for 2.5 years. And now all of a sudden you're saying, nope, no more. That's it. What happened? That's what happened. Transfiguration happened. That's not the only thing that meant. Not even close. But it is how Mark is demarcating that stark break in the book and how things are going to change dramatically. Right in the center of the book, he's saying, this is where it changed, and this is how we see it changed, or why it changed. But he's also changing his approach, and this is more important. If you haven't listened to anything I said, I understand, but listen to this. He's no longer answering the question. He's no longer answering the question that the man asked. Do you have any power at all? He's no longer answering that question. He's been answering that question for 8 chapters. Can you do anything? Do you have any power? And he's been showing them with good spirit, very patiently, very willingly, showing them for 8 chapters, I absolutely have power. Not only do I absolutely have power, I have absolute power. But he's no longer answering that question. He's not even going to entertain that question. In fact, now he's asking his own question. His question is, do you have any faith? I've shown you I have power. Do you have any faith? No more, can you do anything? Now it's, can you believe? Because if you can believe, anything is possible. Your sins could be forgiven. Your marriage could be healed. Your pride and selfishness could be joyfully crucified. Your fears, doubts, and emptiness could be turned into deep, purposeful joy if you could believe. He's not answering the question of whether he has the power to do those things. He's already answered that question. This is a new question. Can you believe? He answered his with aplomb. How are you doing on answering yours? So Mark gives you 8 chapters to explain how Jesus answered your question, your legitimate question of whether or not he had any power. How are you doing answering Jesus' question regarding whether or not you can believe? Can you believe? In the midst of heartbreaking tragedy, can you believe? Not just can you believe, right? That's not enough. Can you believe in Jesus? I would tell you that if you aren't struggling to believe like that man was struggling to believe, then you aren't even trying. As soon as that question got turned around and asked to the man, can you believe? He immediately realized how difficult that would be to answer. His response was, I believe. I can't do it as well as Linda did, but I believe. Help my unbelief. Isn't that how you and I often feel when we're asked that question? Like I'm asking you right now, how are you doing with believing? If you're really trying, you're probably going to have an answer very similar to this man's. I do believe. And deep down you know that if it were put to the test, it'd be hard. Believing isn't just hard. Believing is impossible. Faith isn't hard. Faith is impossible. But Jesus conquered the impossible. That's his answer to that man's question. There is nothing impossible because he conquered the impossible. And how do we know that? The Mount of Transfiguration. God shined glory down on him. And it came out of him. And we saw the glory of God like the only begotten of the Father, full of mercy and truth, full of grace. We saw it. It's evident. The question if there's anything, no, there is no longer anything impossible. But we're weak, we're full of fear, and we're short-sighted. I get that. So does Jesus. And so the man cries out, "Help my unbelief." Basically saying, I believe, I really don't believe. And Jesus helps his unbelief. Too many people think that in order to be saved, they have to have like supernatural faith. But nobody has supernatural faith by definition. No, you just have to be willing to believe. Do you realize that? The man didn't actually believe. He was just willing to believe. He was willing to accept that Jesus could do everything and stop being manipulative and be repentant. Help me believe. If you ask the man 5 seconds after his son is healed, do you believe? You know what he would have said? I absolutely believe. Is there any unbelief? None. None. Because Jesus helped his unbelief. Because he really can do everything. Let's close with prayer. Dear Father, we are so grateful for your word. We're grateful for the thought and the effort that these writers put into communicating these dense, deep ideas, putting them into so many different forms to try to reach us in so many different ways. We're thankful that through it all is your Holy Spirit inspiring them divinely to write your word, your truth, to communicate your grace so that we can be partakers of your glory. We thank you for Jesus Christ. We accept him only. We look to him only. We're thankful that we don't need a temple, a tabernacle, a mountain. That in Jesus Christ, we not only have everything, we are everything in him. Father, in many, many aspects, I don't believe like I should. I want to believe. I have a will to believe. Help my unbelief. In the name of Jesus. Thank you for being here. We'll see you next week.